Much has been said since the Barack Obama administration began, and I think we really do have to resist all attempts to create a double standard, even in terms of the way that particular administration is critiqued in comparison with other administrations. He's been in office long enough to make a baby. He's been in office 9 months. And 9 months does not erase 4 years, and I dare say 8 years of the Bush regime or dynasty, or even Clinton's dynasty. Doesn't erase any of what went on before, and that's not to excuse the weak-kneed, lack of direction and lack of leadership that we're seeing, and it's also not to excuse the escalation of the war in Afghanistan. It's not to be confused with our inquiring minds wanting to know exactly when will it end? When will this domination, when will these illegitimate interventions end? And I guess to answer that question, and to answer the question that David poses to myself and Jeannie as to what we can do, we need to go back deep into a little bit of baby boomer history. Now, I went into college in the late 60s, and I remember the last vestiges of the Vietnam War. And I remember that there was still great resistance. I remember every time the ROTC tried to train in broad daylight on our campus, we would demonstrate and picket and heckle them, and we would laugh at our colleagues and our co-students in uniforms and say, "You're toy soldiers, you're Keystone cops." We would laugh at the presence of the ROTC. And we would protest the recruitment of the CIA on our campuses. And we would protest the recruitment of the FBI on our campuses. And we would protest the presence of multinational corporations waiting to swoop down on students as soon as they got their sheepskins and lift them up into a whole notion of, you're now going to be a part of the prosperity of America, when in fact that could never be true for those who were standing inside dark skin and were the descendants of kidnapped Africans. So this thing called perpetual war, what must be done to fight it? First, we have to acknowledge exactly what it is and why it's necessary to be in existence. When we first began to study as children in the struggle, we started studying nationalism, we studied Marxism, and we studied how imperialist wars came into being and why they came into being. And what we studied was the theory of domination and why it was necessary to at all times have the presence and the reality of dominations to maintain the vicious cycle of the status quo. And coming from the state of Mississippi, trying to make it real compared to what, as Roberta Flack and Les McCann said so many years ago, it's really easy to make it real compared to what, when I think about where I'm from and where my family is from, and that is the state of Mississippi. The state of Mississippi ties with Louisiana, as you know, being the poorest state in the nation. The region where I'm from, the Mississippi Delta, ties only with Appalachia and maybe New Mexico in terms of poverty, in terms of grinding, cyclical, unending, unrelenting poverty. At the same time, the state of Mississippi has the largest regiment of the National Guard. We send more soldiers out to fight in that war than any other state in the United States. We are indeed one of the poorest, if not the poorest state. We do not have health care. Many of our people work at places like Walmart and cannot afford health care, cannot afford a quality of life that is anywhere near survival. And so hanging on by the threads, being promised nothing, not being allowed to, because you're too poor to enter into the gates of academia, you go and sign up. And so you say, is there a draft? Well, of course there's a draft. it's a quasi-draft, it's a constructive draft, but when you have no other options for employment, when you have no other options for health care benefits, when you have no other options to take care of your little baby boy and girl, it is indeed a draft system. Because when the poor has no other options, then the thought of entering into the rich man's war becomes the only option. And coming home in a body bag becomes not only a possibility, but in many cases, a reality. And then we look at the way people are treated. We look at how, at one point in our history, the Army was completely and totally segregated, and black soldiers were not allowed to fight alongside white soldiers, and they were sent into the most dangerous, if there is such a thing as an attractive area, most unattractive assignments, if there is such a thing as an attractive war assignment. And nothing really has changed in terms of institutionalized racism and extreme poverty. This government continues to try to, with all its might, claim that class is not an issue. And those of us who have not shaken off, or not, as the great thinkers said, committed any form of class suicide, sometimes we buy into that. We actually believe it, and we sort of peddle that, maybe soft peddling, because we don't do any polemicking around it, but we certainly don't do anything to draw those lines clearly and explain what the relationship is between the imperialist system and the wars that maintain it. And how do the wars maintain it? You look at the early liberation struggles on the continent of Africa. Each time there was a chance that one of those struggles would be lifted up in real liberation and self-determination, not a prop-up like a Mobutu-type prop-up regime, but an actual Lumumba-type liberation regime. Whenever that happened, New Jewel movement in Grenada, Congo, wherever it happened, and Thomas Sankara, so short was his reign, so short was his tenure as president. We saw him speak in New York City up in Harlem. 2 weeks later, he was assassinated. So every time there was a real legitimate attempt to really fight off and shake off the domination of imperialism, the swoop in, the coups came and destroyed. So that is what we mean when we say that war is actually the economic, financial arm of imperialism. It is the arm that says you can exist as long as you don't get out of line. So what do we need to do? Because that's really what it's all about. First, we have to recognize that it is necessary to maintain these systems of exploitation. The gang-up brute force is required to seal off the empire and protect it from the restless natives of all stripes. And so in case you think the natives only come in brown or black skin, the natives are anybody who stands against the status quo and says, look, there's got to be something more than this. And then again, how dare you question that? And if you keep questioning that and you dare to have dialogue, or God forbid you march on us, then we got to put you down. So the terrorist front forms a wall around the spoils and treasures, the stolen wealth, and stolen people too. The culture of foot soldier justice ensures that young boys and girls will go off to war thinking that they actually are soldiers doing something patriotic and great, and come back maimed and even in a body bag. The order of wealth and prosperity in the midst of grinding poverty. And so the resistance movement has to match that. The resistance movement has to call forth a historical memory of when we didn't just sit around and let this stuff happen. And we can't now go into peekaboo mode. We can't now go into a wait and see mode. We can't now suddenly equate being afraid of being called racist with being critical, with being in protest mode, no matter who is at the helm of the empire. And Richard said it on the first night, and then again it was most eloquently stated during our African plenary, where it was stated, well, look, Barack Obama, surely, when you look at Bush and the other knuckleheads, of course, he's pedigree, he's smart, he sounds good. He doesn't embarrass us when he goes out and he speaks. Bush, we're hanging our heads, lurking in a corner, trying to keep from letting anyone hear our American accent because we're so embarrassed by his phonetic inaccuracies and everything else about him. But now we got this polished pedigree, okay? We can't confuse that, though, with some overthrow that never happened. We can't confuse that with socialist revolution. We got to be just as vigilant. We got to come out in greater numbers. The campuses are so quiet now about the war. The campuses are giving Barack a pass on the Afghanistan piece and forget about Iraq. But on Afghanistan, who is even having the debates that need to be had? Who is really mounting serious protest movements? It's because of the fatigue. And it's also because in some ways the middle class character of some of the work had us vacillating back and forth and saying, well, 20 years, I thought this stuff was going to be over. I did my time. Now I got to go collect my trust fund, or I got to go get a real job. You know, all of those things that we are privileged to be able to do, which the sufferers that we are pleased and privileged to stand beside never get to do. We got to shake that stuff off. We got to be more bold. We got to be more graphic. We can't be 8.5 by 11 when the imperialist forces are like 24 by 24. And you're walking around with a handout like this when you should have big placards with people with their heads hanging off and their arms blown off. You got to be graphic. You know how the pro-abortion, and they're scary, but they will show you pictures of blown up babies. Of course, the stuff is genetically and biologically crazy, but they do what they have to do. They foam at the mouth to get their point across, where we're being cute and trying to worry about, well, I don't want to be considered racist. I mean, we got the first black president. I mean, my God, I got to go slow here. I got to do the peekaboo because I don't want anybody to think that I'm criticizing Barack Obama. I'm a black woman. I'm proud to say that my grandchildren are living in an era where there's the first black president. That will get me a calendar that has his picture along with George Washington Carver and Phyllis Wheatley. That will get me on Black History Day being able to celebrate a new phase of history and say we have the first black president. It's feel-good stuff, and we want to feel good. But when you shake that off, we're in a nightmare. And you can't come out of a nightmare saying, whoa, glad I woke up, man, I feel much better. You got to deal with what you were dreaming when you were in that nightmare. So it's important not to evade the issue of protest. It's important to have forums like Neri said. We need to have many, many more. The Guild needs to hook up with other legal organizations and have just a barrage of pop-ed pieces all the time. We need to do billboards. In our organization, we put up billboards. We put up a billboard about sexual harassment that said, did he touch you? Did he threaten to fire you if you said no? Sexual harassment is a crime. What about a billboard that says, wouldn't you rather have a job than go to war? Okay, wouldn't you rather go to college than have a low-wage job? See, they won't deal with the issues that cause our young brothers and sisters to go to war. They go to war because they don't want to work at McDonald's. They go to war because they don't want to end up at Walmart, where they won't even be able to afford the health insurance. So if we don't address the fundamental issues of exploitation and the system that we languish under, we're just really barking at the moon. And so my suggestion is that we go in deep, deep, deep righteous indignation, deep, deep protest mode. That we do the marches again. We never should have stopped because we're not free. You know, and Rosa Parks gave her last speech at 92. I plan to be right there. When I'm 92 years old, I'm going to be saying the same thing. This stuff is not working. And even if I'm on a cane, I'm going to be pointing that cane and giving the finger and doing whatever I got to do to let them know I'm not down with it. Even as I approach twilight, I'm not down with it. And if we don't do that, if we don't have young resistant spirits, Nobody's going to remember us for when we used to do something and now we're going to let you all have it. We got to stand beside our young brothers and sisters. This out to pasture nonsense about retirement is just crazy. You retire when we're free. You retire when there's no war left that our children are going to fight. You retire when everybody has health care and a hospital bed when they get sick. You retire when every prop-up dictator is crushed. You retire when every glossy pedigree trickster, even if it happens to be the newest president, you retire when all of them are checked and exposed. That's when retirement comes. When liberation comes, then I can go and join an all-girls band or do backup singing with Tina, who's just ageless, and I can stand behind her doing my steps and, doing my twirls and really not feel guilty about having a music career instead of a resistance career. Yes, we all want to paint flowers and trees, but damn if those bombs are not still coming. We got to deal with the bombs that are still coming and the landmines that our children have to deal with. So if you're ready to talk seriously about staying in their faces throughout this administration and all the ones to come, then let's hook up. Let's hook up and let's do it. Thank you.